So here we are, transitioning into the summer season. And when you think about summer celebrations, probably immediately your mind goes toward weddings. Summer is the season for celebrating weddings. Now, I know maybe there's some of that is up in the air this year with COVID concerns, but typically this is what we do in the summer. We celebrate weddings. So to get us thinking in those lines, I wanted to just start with a quick quiz for you. I want to share with you some of the top wedding picks for 2020. What some of the trends are in particular areas. So first of all, top vacation destination or honeymoon destination. Do you know what it is? Now, I don't know if you'd still be going there in the midst of COVID concerns, but the top vacation destination is Italy. What about this? Top wedding color. It's actually the color rose right now. Cinnamon rose mixed with dusty rose. That's the top wedding color of 2020. What about top wedding song? This is a flashback to Elvis. It's a remix of an Elvis song that's been done by Haley Reinhart. It's called I Can't Help Falling in Love. And then one more. Top wedding scripture. Can you guess what it is? 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That poetic text where Paul says, love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, it's not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered. By the way, if you're watching this online and you had that text at your wedding, just write in the comment section. We use that text. So guess where I want to go this summer in our teaching series? You guessed it, 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're launching a series called Love Is. We're going to take 13 weeks to look at the 13 verses of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But as we go there, let me just clarify this for you. 1 Corinthians 13 is not exclusively about marriages. It actually pertains to all human relationships. I know a lot of times we hear these words and we immediately associate them with a wedding. And so we begin to apply them merely to marriages. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're married, there is so much here that you're going to take away as you begin to assess your marriage relationship in terms of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But this is not merely about marriages. This is about all of human relationships. In fact, if you look at the context for the writing of these words in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul says nothing about marriage. No, the context is he's writing to a church in Corinth that has some pretty serious issues. I mean, we're talking about fighting and factions. We're talking about power struggles. People who are saying, I've got a gift that's more important than your gift. We're talking about rampant sexual immorality that is unchecked. I mean, this is a pretty messy, messed up situation. And maybe some of you can relate to that. You see that in your own life, in your own home, in your own relationships. Or you look out at the world right now and you say, oh, it is such a mess. And Paul, he sees what's happening in the church in Corinth. And he says at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, now let me show you a more excellent way. In other words, let me show you a better way. Let me show you what matters most. And then he launches into talking about love. Listen to these words from 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 3. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Paul says, as you look at all the pursuits of life, and certainly there are a number of worthy pursuits, he says, let me tell you what matters most. Love does. Love is what matters most. And he references at least 4 different situations where if we don't have love, those things don't matter at all. First of all, he says, if I don't have love, nothing I say will matter. In Corinth, there was an emphasis on eloquence. And even here in our culture today, if someone can stand up, if someone can speak confidently and persuasively, they receive our respect and our admiration. And so it's like Paul is saying, if I can stand up and give a TED Talk and receive a standing ovation, and yet I don't do that from a heart that's motivated by love, guess what? I am nothing. Because if I don't have love, nothing I say will matter. Secondly, he says, if I don't have love, nothing I know will matter. He says, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge. In other words, if I can have an intellectual conversation about virtually anything, if I can talk about the details of the structure of an atom, if I can speak to the mysteries of the inner workings of the Trinity as we celebrate that here this Trinity Sunday, if I can wax and wane eloquent about that, if I can beat you every time in Trivial Pursuit, if my mind is just full of all of this random knowledge and I don't have love, it says it doesn't matter. I'm nothing. Third, he says, if I don't have love, nothing I believe will matter. He says, echoing the words of Jesus, if I have faith that can move mountains. In other words, if I believe that God is able to do the impossible in whatever situation I find myself up against, and yet I'm not coming at that from a place of love, and there's some level of selfish motivation there, then guess what? It doesn't matter. And then lastly, he says, if I don't have love, nothing I give will matter. If I give all I possess to the poor, if I'm incredibly generous, if I give large amounts to the church, and this is not just monetarily, then he goes on to talk about, even if I give up my body and experience a level of hardship and suffering. And Paul knows what it's like to suffer. In 2 Corinthians, he talks about the times that he was whipped and shipwrecked and imprisoned. He says, none of that matters if it doesn't come from a heart that is motivated by love. Because love matters most. In fact, everything minus love equals nothing. You can do the right thing, and yet for the wrong reasons. And so in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It means nothing because love matters most. Why is that? Here's the answer. Because God is love. 1 John 4:16 says that quite simply. God is love. And so if we're going to experience the life that God intended us to live, we can't do that apart from love. Love matters most because God is love. You know, here in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul uses a very specific Greek word for love. There was at least 4 different words that he could have chosen from when it came to describing the way that we relate to each other, the love that we're supposed to have. And he uses the Greek word agape. Agape refers to a selfless, sacrificial, God-originating love. It's a love that's constantly looking to the other, constantly asking, how can I meet the needs of my neighbor? It's a love that takes all of who I am and offers it to all of what you need. And this is at the heart of who God is. You know, here on Trinity Sunday, we could ask the question, what words would you use to describe God? And there's a number of answers. God is holy. He's completely other. He's without sin. God is omniscient. He's all-knowing. God is omnipotent. He's all-powerful. God is eternal. He's without beginning and he's without end. God is, get it, unchanging. And all of those words would be true. But the most important word to describe who God is to go back to 1 John 4 again. God is love. God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit has always been, from all time and eternity, relating to each other in this very deep interpersonal dance of love. And when God created us, He created us to live in that love, to receive that love, and to reciprocate that love to others. This is why Jesus says in John 13:34, as I have loved you, so now you must love each other. This is why Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 39, as he's being asked to summarize the law, what does it all come down to? He says, it all comes down to love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. But we struggle with that, don't we? I mean, you take these words from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, and they're very beautiful and poetic, but they're also convicting at the same time. Like, no, I haven't always been patient. I haven't always been kind. Why? Because I'm a sinner. And what is sin? It's simply self-love. It's love that's curved inward. It fails to look out. It fails to look up. It fails to understand the depths of the love that God has for us and the love that He invites us to share with each other. So when we find ourselves in that place where we're convicted of our self-love, where do we go? What do we do? Well, what does God do for us? Because God is love, God continues to persistently pursue us, even to the point that He's willing to passionately suffer and die on the cross in order to draw us back into that loving relationship with Him. This is what's described in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Please understand this. As we move throughout this summer, this is not simply a Love Better series. This is not me telling you, you need to do this better. This begins by understanding that this is the love that God has shown and God demonstrates to you. This is you need to receive this love. You need to understand this love better series. And I'm utterly convinced of this. As you understand that love better, you will in turn begin to reciprocate it. You know, studies have been done of marriages that begin to experience forward movement. Where does that come from? It comes from one person deciding to pursue the other and love them well. And as that other person begins to understand that they are loved, then they begin to reciprocate that love. This summer, this series begins with you and I understanding that God in Christ is patient with us, that He is kind toward us, that He's not easily angered with us, that He keeps no record of wrongs. And as we more deeply experience that and understand that, out of that, we'll begin to live in that love in the way that we relate toward each other. So let me close with one final image for us. And it's the image of a diamond on a wedding ring. It was 16 years ago this week that I placed a ring on the finger of my wife. And I said, I'm committed to you till death parts us, to love you and to cherish you. And I still remember going ring shopping, knowing that I wanted to put a ring on her finger, but I didn't know what that ring was going to look like. And so I walked into the jeweler, and I learned all about diamonds. I learned about their color, and I learned about the carat and the size of it, and I learned about its cut. You see, each diamond has a number of facets or faces or cuts to it. And it's all of these facets that as you look at it, it begins to sparkle and reflect this light. You know, even to this day, I still play with my wife's wedding ring. And it's beautiful. And it's a reflection of that love that we have toward each other. There's so many different layers to it. You know, this is the way that the ancient Jewish people looked at the scriptures. The Hebrews would talk about something called the 70 faces of the Torah. In other words, they understood that you could take one text, one single verse, and you could look at it from a number of different angles. And maybe it was one person's perspective or another person's perspective, or maybe it was at one point in your life or another point in your life, and you would see all the different levels of beauty and truth that were there. And it was constantly dazzling and sparkling. Some of you might be saying, really, 13 weeks on one chapter in the Bible? No, 13 weeks in one chapter. There's so much there for us to consider. It's like that diamond on a wedding ring. So many different facets, so many different faces, so many different layers and levels of truth and beauty that I believe that we're going to discover throughout this summer. And as we do, I believe there's at least two different faces that we're going to see. One, we're going to see the face of Jesus. We're going to understand the depths of his love, the layers of beauty that he expresses toward us. And then two, it's also my hope that you'll begin to see your face reflected in this text. As you begin to live in that love that he has for you, to receive it and then to reciprocate it. Because love is what matters most.